The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, aviation, business, literature, education. The African American Legend series talks about blacks in the arts, areas where blacks had been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. And today we will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas like working with veterans. Our guest today is Joe Mashariki, the Executive Director of Black Veterans for Social Justice. Glad to have you with us
yes,
today,
good
Joe.
afternoon, and it's an honor and privilege to be here with a legend and a hero as you are.
Well, we're all legends. We all work the cause. Now tell us about Black Veterans for Social Justice. It's been around since 1979. It's one of the most persistent and effective organizations in the African American service community, yet you don't have a lot of money, but you've also raised a lot of money. Tell us about how you got started and where you focused.
Well, we focus on veterans. We started dealing with advocacy and justice for veterans. That we knew that the Vietnam War, our communities took a big toll, not only in terms of our males being pulled out, but in terms of them coming home with numerous problems, Agent Orange, unemployment, mental disorientation, etc., no money, and coming back to our families, and it was up to our families to carry that burden. And we found it to be very unfair and unjust, and that we wanted to see if we could help our community carry that burden a little. Many of the veterans that came home were eligible for some type of benefits or financial support or even medical services, but because of the nature of the military still being very racist and us having a lot of problems in it, many of us didn't want to even apply for benefits. All we wanted to do was come home. So we began to organize around those kinds of issues and begin to try to, in our own simple little way, be supportive of each other. In essence, empowering ourselves.
Now you are a veteran.
Yes, I am. That's
now
correct.
You served in which part of the service?
I served in the Army during the Vietnam era, and I served in Germany. You know, and again, you know, we did what we was asked to do, and we did it well and honorably discharged. I am, and my father before me served in World War II, etc. And you know, we came home to what we considered to be a rotten deal.
Well, of course, you know I'm a Tuskegee Airman.
Yes, you are.
Fought in World War II, and we
That's
came home. There was a sign at the bottom of the gangplank, whites this way, colored this way. And we really had it tough, and I think because of the fact that President Truman integrated the services in 1948, we thought things would be a lot better. But come the Vietnam War, we find that was sort of the poor people's war. The rich people, the middle class, managed to avoid it, and significant numbers of African Americans, Latinos, and low-income whites served in the military in a
on the front lines.
Kind of a nasty war. So they got a lot of medical problems, psychological problems, etc. So now you and some of your colleagues who are working with veterans decided to address this, and you called your organization Black Veterans for Social Justice. And what were some of the first programs you started?
Well, we started with basically providing tender loving care and a listening ear to the veterans who came back and really had a lot that they want to say and had no one to listen to them. The Veterans Administration, although it has changed appreciably, then was not interested in the types of issues and concerns and problems that the veterans returning from Vietnam had. The community, the private community, the public was not interested in them because of the nature of the war. Most of the community or the public began to realize that it was an unjust war, and that we did more and more horrible, vicious types of acts on other human beings than we should have done, and it was for what? For nothing, because today we have a good relationship with Vietnam. And so we began to look at that and try to address that.
So basically you started out in terms of your capacity as a Veterans Council, listening to some of the issues that veterans faced, in a sense their anger about what they were supposed to do. And the fact it was a very brutal war and some very inhumane acts were perpetrated both by the Vietnamese and by us. And I imagine there's a certain amount of collective guilt about what was done in the name of this great country, and then to come back and find those who'd stayed out of the war were getting all of the benefits, getting the education, getting the jobs, and these young men and women, mainly men, had missed this, and yet the country, when they came back, didn't respect them, didn't see that they were moved ahead, so much so that even in the Veterans Administration they had to fight. Because I remember when I was president of the college, they had to fight to document the fact that they'd had a military injury or that they were psychologically disturbed, so to get those additional benefits and the money that it took for them to survive. So then Black Vets for Social Justice steps in, and after having done your listing, what specific programs did you develop and how did you fund those programs?
Well, I think it's important in that I'm still angry today. In fact, I was watching the Tuskegee Airmen film the other day. I was angry about that, you know, in terms of all we've done and where we now. But then I wanted to channel my anger, okay? I didn't want to strike out individually. I wanted to strike out in terms of changing the types of institutions that existed.
Well,
so
a lot of the vets didn't do that. They internalized, became involved with drugs,
That's
became
correct.
involved with criminal activity,
That's correct.
which was just exacerbated a difficult problem that they were facing. So you and your who started it along with you? Who was
Well,
on the
we
people?
had a World War II veteran who's still with us, Brother John Carter, served in World War II in Italy. We had Larry Smith, who was injured in the military and was featured in the film The Bronze.
Men of Bronze?
Men of Bronze. He's still with us. And we had several other founders that are still with us today. And we've been, you know, locked in, focused. And those are the types of programs that we try to address to service the veterans, substance abuse services, permanent housing services, family reunification, employment, benefits, counseling. Whatever we could do to help the veteran and their family, we did and we still do. And the United Way was one of the first agencies that gave us some seed money that allowed us, because we volunteered for about a year or so. A person donated their storefront to us, a brother in the community, donated, and we fixed it up, and using the skills and the knowledge that we had used in the military, we fixed it up. And people used to think we had a paid operational staff. We had a volunteer staff, but we structured it in a way that we were open from 9 to 5, 9 to 6, and then we used to go fish, and we used to do more camaraderie types of things. And then eventually we noticed the change that more and more females had been going in and coming out, and that the female population needed services. And so there was a lot of kinship between the male population and needs and the female population and needs. So we began to advocate for those as well.
Now, one key thing you just described, you were located in the community. Were you on Fulton Street?
That's correct.
And I think I visited
Between
there.
Franklin and, the one you visited is South Portland. Originally, we was on Fulton's between Franklin and Clarkson, one of the hottest spots in the Bedford-Stuyvesant community. And we loved it, and we still love it.
Of course, what you're developing, and we're going to talk about this later, a theory of social organization and social planning. Too frequently, people who plan for someone and are not part of the group they're planning with. And basically, of course, this was the early 80s where things were pretty tough in this country because of Ronald Reagan and the cutbacks and the like, so that you were taking, and your colleagues were taking, a positive approach to this. But you also played the political game. You learned how to put pressure on the various political entities. Could you tell us a little about some of the things you did to get the attention of the politicians so that they would work with this particular group?
Well, I had been involved before I was involved with the veterans, with the Black United Front and the Brooklyn Community Congress and a number of different organizations, the East Educational and Cultural Center. And so I will say that the political representatives that we brought our concerns to within our community embraced us wholeheartedly. But we had been able to put pressure on people, knowing that we were conscious people. We knew what was going on within our community. We knew who the movers and shakers were. and that we knew how to participate in electoral politics and in the types of issues that cause people to come out and express their concern. So we were able to use that, but not as a punitive measure, but as an organizing measure, because we've got support from Al Van, Assemblyman Al Van, and Roger Green, and Senator Velma Montgomery, Annette Robinson. We got support from our, even as far away Arthur Eve. So that was a little bit easier for us.
Well, you started with a small group and you've expanded. You expanded very, very widely, so much so that you moved into the area of housing. Now, tell us why you got into housing, how you got into housing, and why that's so important.
Well, eventually, our mission talked about being a one-stop shop for veterans when they came out. Veterans have a poor transitional assistance, and we wanted to be there when they transition into our community. And so we found out that many of the veterans was coming back, they didn't have a place to stay, or their families that they left were being evicted because they weren't paying rent, so many of them was in the shelters. So we are the first organization to put pressure on the state to bring our concerns to the New York State government to rehab housing for veterans and their families. And today we have close to 80 units of permanent housing for veterans and their families, and we've expanded that. We'll be doing a 14 permanent unit building for people with AIDS. And then we also have almost finished and moved people in, low-income working people. So the whole question of housing, which you know is a big need within our community, but we've approached it from a veteran's needs and have been able to expand that to their families and their dependents.
Did you get a dedicated stream? Do you have special legislation to provide money for veterans housing, or were you able to just work with the existing housing funding mechanism to make sure the veterans got their share?
Well, we work with the existing housing structures and advance the veterans issue to make sure that they gave consideration to the veterans. And that's what we've been doing. We've been trying to get veterans to see ourselves as a population in this city, and that we should be getting more support, and we should be represented more, and we should be respected more. Every year comes Veterans Day, you always hear all the rhetoric, and then you see the businesses, you know, have sales on behalf of veterans, discount, etc. Then the day after, there's no food for veterans, there's no housing for veterans, there's no employment for veterans, there's no counseling and mental health assistance for veterans, or it's limited. And yet the discussion of what we have contributed in this country does not match with what this country has given back to us.
Well, we recently had Veterans Day, and we had a small parade, not many people marched, and they were pointing up the fact that the large number of veterans, largest number of World War II veterans, are older, don't participate, many of them passed away. And now we have this, I call it a relatively new group, the Vietnam vets, that's still 30 years ago, and then more recently the vets of the Persian Gulf and Bosnia and so on. So it really raises an interesting question about the attitude of the country towards service and how we reward service. Because I know when I came from the service, they had the GI Bill and they had special housing and so on. And that's really what brought about the new middle class coming afterward. Now we're going into the new millennium. We have technology replacing some of the manufacturing and so on. We have people who've gone to the military now and have gotten very finely honed technological skills. Then the question is, how do you absorb those into the economy? For example, should veterans get a preference in terms of civil service exams? Years ago, they would get a 5-point preference. Should they get that preference? What about the reaction to the so-called favored treatment of veterans? I'll ask you a direct question. Should veterans get favored treatment when it comes to being employed?
Well, you know I support veterans getting all that they should get, because again, when you look at what the country has to offer and you look at the people that have gone in, particularly yourself as an example, and put your life on the line and had to fight racism totally uphill to establish democracy in some type of meaningful sense. It's not real yet, but in a meaningful sense that people could benefit from it. What is it for them to give a piece to you? Because we're not just doing an individual. Veterans have families. So in this city, if you've got over 1 million veterans, when you talk about a veteran having some type of stabilized situation, you're really talking about 3 or 4 other people. So you're talking about 4 million people or so. So that if we help our veterans that helped us, then we're really helping ourselves. And yes, I definitely support that. And not only that, I think that we need to be more supportive of organizations like ours of veterans. We are now, we purchased a building with a local community bank helping us. And yet, you know, on the whole, the business community, foundation community, has turned its back on us. Is it because of what? With veterans?
Now that's
You know?
interesting. You say the business financial community, foundation community turned it back. You mean that they didn't provide the funding when you applied to purchase and renovate this building, or it's just an attitudinal thing? What do you think?
I think it's
about
both. I think it's both. I think in this city, and you know the city is highly political, if you don't jump to the tunes that the financiers and the people with the money call, they tend not to be supportive of you, even if you're doing an excellent job. And the larger banking community, the larger financial community has not, when we've asked them, I could tell you the facilities fund, which was supposed to be helping people get facilities, did not come across and turn its back on us. We gave them this much paperwork. And a local bank, without all the paperwork, without all the questions, just stepped up to the plate. And that's rare in this city. And people don't really want the city to develop in terms of all the human beings in the city, but it's still, you know, very too selective.
Well, is part of this due to the militants? Yeah, you and your organization, and many organizations we relate to, are very militant. And by militant, I'm not talking about burning down buildings. I'm talking about identifying issues and putting a face on an issue and a name on an issue. So that many times, and also there's competition. Unfortunately, there's competition between the veterans and labor sometimes, and competition with the health industry. So everybody wants their share of what seems to be a very limited pot, although in our society, particularly now with the economic boom, it really isn't a limited pot.
That's what I was going to say.
But it does get limited because of things like tax cuts and incentives for businesses to stay in the city. So how do you work around that?
Well,
because you obviously have been very successfully around for 20 years at a time when it's been very difficult to maintain funding for an advocacy group.
Well, I don't think it's limited. I respectfully disagree. I think there's enough of money in this country, there's enough of money in New York, which is the money capital of the world, for us to open up new avenues for which people can generate resources and address social concerns through their local mechanisms. I think that this has not happened in the city, that we have not gone into low socioeconomic communities and give the resources, but not only just the resources, provide the mechanisms for the individual to begin to help themselves. And that's one of the things we like about this building that we've located, is that not only will we be able to provide services out of it, but we can provide educational programs from this building, because it's in a population, an area where the population needs an organization like us. We do computer training, so we'll be providing computer training. There's a banquet hall, so there can be a banquet there. That's business opportunities. So there's a lot of other opportunities that we can have within these walls of this new building, other than just providing services. And we're going to continue to do the services, but we have to help people to recognize that they're a part of New York and that they should participate and travel and, you know, take on themselves as a responsibility in terms of economics and family.
Well, the coming of the new millennium gives everybody a chance to sort of turn the page, a blank page, and do some things differently. If you were in a business or industry and someone like yourself came asking for support for black veterans for social justice, what would you tell them that you are doing to improve the quality of life in our community in the 21st century?
Well, I think the first thing off is that we do advocacy for community development, community empowerment. I guess I'm still an old 60-ite in that if you empower the individual, they can address the problems themselves, as opposed to us keep on wanting to catch the fish for the person. And so that would be one thing that we're continuing to do, going even more so going into the new millennium. Institutional building. One of the things is that, yes, it's been 20 and a half years since we started Black Vets. It's been over 32 since I've been providing social services and counseling to the community. So we need to build institutions as opposed to just keep on individuals out there. So that it's important for us to show our community that I come from this community, I did make a contribution, and here's an institution that will keep on servicing our community and be a model and help people to do that. The other thing is that I think we are moving to service families more, looking at the whole family in terms of the young people, in terms of the fathers, in terms of the mothers. And these are things that I think we can now address on a broader level because we have the expertise, we have the knowledge. We've got good staff that's been with us 6 years or so, you know, and so we can do more than we have done in the past, and we're going to attempt to do it.
Well, isn't part of this, though, sort of a public relations problem, that we do a lot of good things in the African American community, and sometimes even we fellow African Americans don't know about them, and certainly the larger community doesn't know about them. So wouldn't that suggest that there needs to be more in the way of outreach to explain and involve the corporations and the funders in what you're doing, bringing them so that they will see what you're doing, having some type of interaction? Because one of the problems, particularly coming out of the poverty programs, is that a lot of money was passed on and there was no accountability or limited accountability. So then when the money dried up, then the establishment began to say, well, look, we can't fund that because they can't spend the money responsibly. Now, you talked about leadership training and so on. That's a very interesting part of it. But what about the public relations aspect? What about helping people to understand the nature of the problem and the nature of what organizations like Black Vets are doing?
Well, I guess that's a dilemma I had to try to overcome. Coming out of the poverty program, there was problems, but there was a lot done. There was a lot accomplished, and it wasn't conveyed, it wasn't told the way it should be. And for me, myself, when I got started, I didn't get started to try to tell people what I was doing. It's something that I just wanted to do because of my experience in growing up. Right now, yes, that's part of why I have my tie and my suit, and that's part of why I'm here, you know, thankful to you, to try to do a public relations piece, to tell people what we are doing and how we're doing it, and begin to help other people do it where we can, because we have taken a beating over the years. And we're stronger, we're more knowledgeable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be successful. And we have to look at the things that get us to a point where we can be successful. And those are the things that we all have to change to do, because the object is to accomplish our missions, to accomplish our plans, not to just busy work and make like we did something when we really didn't do nothing.
Well, let's talk about leadership. You obviously are a leader. What needs to be done to develop more leaders in the African American community? Well, now, you don't have to say thank you,
no, but I laugh
you
because
are a leader.
Don't tell that to my children. Because as soon as I ask them to do something, I mean, they're like, oh, yeah?
Use some of the techniques you already explained here. All right, what do you think are some of the main characteristics, particularly in the African American community, that we need to develop in terms of leadership?
Well, I think that we've made a lot of progress over the years. I think, one, we're not letting ourselves be divided. Secondly, we have to talk about the issues and respect each other, even though we might disagree with what we might say in terms of sharing. The other thing I think is the class kind of thing. I think that tears us apart, thinking that one person, because we have more, then we're better than someone else, or we're far more educated than someone else. That makes us better. That makes us entitled to more. I don't think those things help the community, although there might be a certain level of justice if you go through college and you accomplish, PhD. Yes, there might be a certain level of justice. I've worked for some things as a person that just lays around, you know what I mean? But the fact that a person lays around and you have your PhD doesn't mean that you're a better human being. You're more valuable as a human being than this human being. And that human being may never learn the important things that you've learned if you don't open up that communications. So I think leadership has to be honest. It has to be respectful of each other. It has to be willing to sacrifice and to give something back to our community to help our brothers and sisters that need help. And we have to be an advocacy for our people, for the city. And I think that the whole question of resources, we can have resources. It's like the person used to say, it's not what you got, it's what you come home and what you do with what you got.
All right.
And these are barriers that we have to,
So what is your
down.
major challenge for the new millennium?
I would say my health and continuing to structure the organization so that it can go forward without me, that it can continue to help to address the community and be a part of an infrastructure in our community. We lost a lot of our infrastructures in our community coming out of the 60s, and we need to have new blood. We work with young people. We got a brotherhood and a sisterhood with young people, and we need to continue to build those things. They don't happen overnight, and we got to build them in a way that if we don't get resources, the people themselves see themselves as being resourceful and can make these things happen. And I think that's a kind of legacy that I want my children and our children and this city to have.
Well, that's a good way to march into the new millennium. We've been talking with Joe Mashariki, the Executive Director of Black Veterans for Social Justice, and we've seen what leadership can do in helping to solve some of the problems in our community.